Due to the graphic nature of this murder case, listener discretion is advised. This episode includes dramatizations and discussions of murder and assault that some people may find offensive. We advise extreme caution for children under 13.
You gonna pick that up?
I answered it the last 4 times. It's that Lorraine Fuller. She's been calling all day.
Oh, come on. Fine, I got it. Los Angeles Police. Officer Daniel speaking.
Yes, hi. I'm calling about Bobby Fuller. He left last night and he's still not home.
Mrs. Fuller, like we already said, Bobby probably just did some partying. He'll be back eventually.
Pardon me, officer. It's not like my son to just take off like that. When he left, he said he'd be right back.
I know it might be hard to accept, but Bobby is a rock star. Sometimes rock stars don't come home at night.
Not my Bobby. Oh, wait. The car's back in the driveway. That's strange.
See? Just like we said, Mrs. Fuller.
No. Oh, God, Bobby! Bobby!
What is it? Talk to me.
He's been beaten. He isn't moving. Bobby, wake up! Wake up!
Hello? Hello? Mrs. Fuller!
Don't worry. She'll call back in a few minutes.
We need to get to Bobby Fuller's place. Now!
This is our first episode on Bobby Fuller. This week, we'll cover musician Bobby Fuller's life and brutal death. Next week, we'll uncover who might have been responsible.
We have all that and more coming up. Stay with us. Bobby Fuller was born October 22, 1942 in Goose Creek, Texas. For his parents, Lorraine and Lawson Fuller, Bobby's birth was their second chance. Lorraine had recently fled an abusive marriage in El Paso, and Lawson had already lost a child in an automotive accident. Bobby was the beginning of a beautiful new chapter for the Fuller family.
They had another boy, Randall, 2 years later, and the Fullers suddenly found themselves with a packed house. From the beginning, Randy and Bobby had a tight bond. As they grew up, the boys quickly developed a penchant for trouble. They may have learned their mischievous side from their stepbrother, Jack, Lorraine's son from her first marriage.
The older boy always found himself spending more time in the principal's office than the classroom, and so, in hopes of finding a fresh start, the Fullers packed up and left Texas for Farmington, New Mexico in 1952.
This was where 10-year-old Bobby first discovered music. He'd listened to his mother, Lorraine, play the piano for his whole life, and now he decided to take up the instrument himself.
Bobby took to the piano like a fish to water. He'd sit at the keys for hours, coming up with new songs and practicing old ones. Whenever Mr. and Mrs. Fuller had guests over, Bobby became the entertainment.
I taught him this one.
Is that right? I don't remember you playing this.
Well, I didn't play it like this.
Soon, Bobby's younger brother, Randy, caught the musical bug too, and he became Bobby's follow-up act. In 1954, Lawson's job transferred him to Salt Lake City, Utah, so the family packed up and moved again, and the boys used their musical talents to find friends in the new city.
For 13-year-old Bobby, it was especially easy. As a freshman in high school, he picked up the drums and quickly rose to the top of the Salt Lake City music scene.
Soon, Bobby's reputation as a drummer began to spread. Even though Bobby was barely a teen, people began booking him for shows all over Salt Lake City, including a regular gig at a local beatnik club.
Bobby knew the idea of playing at a beatnik club wasn't going to go over well with his father, so he lied and said he was playing at a coffee shop. But it didn't take long before Lawson learned the truth.
No son of mine is going to be some beatnik.
Dad!
Oh, come on, Lawson. They've hired him for a show. We should be proud.
Proud? That he's entertaining junkies in a club? I don't think so. Too much of that, and our boy is going to turn into some kind of drifter.
It's my life. I'm 13 now, and I can make my own decisions.
Think again. While you're living under my house, you'll be living under my rules. No son of mine will be a goddamn nightclub musician.
Of course, Bobby's parents' objections only made him more secretive about his performances. They had no idea how well he was thriving in his new life as a musician.
The same could not be said about Bobby's stepbrother, Jack. After flunking out of school, Jack had joined the Navy. His time in the service was also short-lived, as he was honorably discharged in 1947. By the time the Fullers were in Salt Lake City, Jack had fallen back into trouble. He had to spend a few months at a mental institution to avoid jail time.
After being released, Jack didn't have many chances left. He approached his stepfather, Lawson, about working with him in the oil fields. Begrudgingly, Lawson put Jack to work. Perhaps it was because he wanted to do something nice for his wife to soften the blow he was about to deliver.
Oh, Lawson, you're home. I was just about to get dinner started, but I figured we should talk about Jack.
Actually, I have something I need to talk to you about first.
What is it? No. You're not moving us again, are you?
I'm sorry, Lorraine.
Where now? Arizona? New Mexico again?
Texas.
Lawson, no.
El Paso.
Lawson, I can't go back there, Lawson. You know I can't.
We don't really have a choice.
Lorraine fled El Paso in the early 1930s to escape her abusive husband. She hadn't been back since, but El Paso was where Lawson's new job was, so that's where they went.
The family pulled into their new city in 1956. It was a much tougher transition than their past moves. Jack started taking regular trips over the Mexico border to party in Juarez, and the 14-year-old Bobby Fuller struggled to keep his grades up at his new school.
But once again, he found his place in the local music scene. Only 6 months after the family moved to El Paso, Bobby entered a drumming competition at his high school.
The competition began with a few seniors trading drum fills. They were good, but they weren't great. Bobby watched patiently. Finally, when there seemed to be an opening in the competition, Bobby asked to have a turn. The older boys scoffed at the new boy, but reluctantly they handed over the sticks.
The seniors looked on in awe. Bobby was mesmerizing. It didn't take the boy long to start finding gigs as a replacement drummer for bands around the city. Eventually, he started to get recognized by some of the El Paso scene's local celebrities, including Jim Reese.
Reese was a young veteran of the Texas rock and roll scene. While Reese's bread and butter was lead guitar, in the 1950s, Reese was also the pianist for a local band called The Counts.
In El Paso, the Counts were huge, but the band never managed to make it outside their hometown. By the late 1950s, the Counts broke up, and Jim recruited his friend Dalton Powell for a new band called the Embers. The Embers needed a drummer, and Jim Reese knew just the person to ask.
Nice show you did out there. You're not bad on the sticks.
Thank you kindly.
I said not bad. I didn't say good.
Excuse me? I know you. You're part of the Counts. I'd like to see your drummer try to—
The Counts are over. I got a new band. You ever heard of the Embers?
Can't say I have.
Well, you have now. We have a practice tomorrow afternoon. If you're free, maybe you should drop by.
Bobby was only 17 when he started lighting up the El Paso scene with the Embers in 1961. But just as Bobby's music career seemed like it was taking off, a tragedy hit the Fuller household that would change his life forever.
Coming up, we'll look at Bobby's journey to stardom and the events that led up to his mysterious death.
By 1961, Bobby Fuller was getting a crash course in the El Paso rock scene as the drummer for the Embers. Back at home, his family life had finally calmed down. His father's job had finally stabilized, and it seemed like the years of moving were behind them. Unfortunately, the period of calm wouldn't last.
February 5th, 1961 was supposed to be just another day for the Fullers. The boys went to school and Lawson went to work. By the time Lawson got home, Lorraine had dinner waiting for them on the table. But one member of the family didn't make it home on time that evening, Bobby's stepbrother, Jack. And as the hours ticked by, Lorraine got worried.
Lawson and Bobby tried to reassure Lorraine that Jack was fine. He was probably just off partying again in Juarez, but Lorraine had a bad feeling that she just couldn't shake. By the time the family went to sleep, Jack still hadn't returned.
That night, Lorraine had a dream. According to her, she was visited by Jack's ghost. The spirit had a message for her.
They got me in Juarez, Mom. I don't know what happened. My head.
When Lorraine woke up the next morning, Jack's bed was still empty. Lawson and the boys started to worry as well. The family called all of Jack's friends and checked every jail in Juarez. Nobody had seen him. After a few tense days, the family finally decided to file a missing persons report with the El Paso Police Department.
It was months before they'd find out what happened. In the spring of 1961, Mrs. Fuller's worst fears were confirmed. The Mexican police finally located Jack's car with a 21-year-old named Roy Handy behind the wheel. Roy swore that Jack gave him the car, but that wasn't like Jack at all.
The Juarez police arrested Roy, but they couldn't get him to open up. And so, in a highly controversial move, they agreed to let Lawson Fuller himself speak to the boy.
I'm telling you, he gave me the car, then left.
That's the thing, Roy. He wouldn't do that. He wouldn't let anyone touch his car.
Why does everybody always think I'm lying?
Look, I know your type. I raised your type.
You don't know me at all.
I know that despite his faults, despite his mistakes, Jack wanted to do the right thing. I think you want to do the right thing too, don't you?
I don't know.
Look, Roy, I already know you're lying and I don't care about it. The only thing I care about is Jack's mother. She's worried sick. Hell, she knows he's probably dead. We all do. We just want some peace. Can't you give a grieving mother some peace? Can't you do that for us?
Okay, there's this reservation. It's not far from here. That's where you'll find him.
Authorities found Jack's body exactly where Roy told them to look. He'd been shot 3 times. His body was almost unrecognizable from the decay.
Lorraine Fuller fell into a deep depression over the loss of her son. She began sleeping all day. At night, she'd lie awake, crying for Jack. Finally, Lawson decided he had to do something about it, so he signed his wife up for electroshock therapy.
As his home life disintegrated, Bobby threw himself deeper into his music. The Embers were playing steady shows, but no record companies would sign them, so Bobby decided to take matters into his own hands.
He saved up money from all his gigs and started building his own personal recording studio inside the Fuller house. His younger brother Randy was right there to help out.
Randy needed some direction in his life. He'd flunked out of school in his early teens and had a baby on the way by the time he was 16. If he didn't figure things out soon, he'd wind up working at the same oil company as his father. Luckily for Randy, Bobby needed a bassist, and Randy was up for the challenge.
In mid-1962, Randy took up the mantle as Bobby's full-time bass player. Wherever Bobby played and whenever he recorded, Randy would be right behind him, plucking a bass line and keeping rhythm.
Randy was the missing piece that brought Bobby's whole band together. By the time Bobby turned 18, he was a local celebrity, and on March 30th, 1962, he sat down for his first interview.
Yeah, so it's always been my dream to visit Easter Island. Those big statues look crazy. Which reminds me, if I had to go to a deserted island and could only take one movie, it would definitely be Spartacus. Oh man, it'd be cool to be in a movie. but I'm not much of an actor. I'll tell you what, though. I'm mean at chess and water skiing. And music, of course. I'm sorry. I've never been interviewed. I guess I'm rambling. What was the question again?
I asked what was next for Bobby Fuller.
Well, we've got a new single. It's coming out in 2 weeks.
Soon, recording studios around the Southwest started showing interest in Bobby and his band. But there was only one studio that was good enough for Bobby, Yucca Records in New Mexico.
Yucca was run by Norman Petty, who had worked with Buddy Holly when he was an up-and-coming Texas musician. To Bobby, Buddy Holly was more than a musical influence. He was his hero.
Bobby would try and copy Holly at every chance he could, and that meant working with Petty. So Bobby hauled the band and their equipment out to New Mexico to record at Yucca.
The song that they recorded with Petty wasn't much of a success, but the experience left a lasting impression on Bobby Fuller.
Bobby made it a point to memorize the equipment and studio dimensions that Petty had used. When he got back to El Paso, he set out to turn his own home studio into an exact replica of Yucca.
He found all the same equipment that Petty had and outfitted his living room with the same padding. Soon, it started to feel like Bobby wasn't recording in his family's house anymore. It felt like his family was living inside Bobby's studio.
When 1963 came around, the band decided that they were done recording and they wanted to tour. But at this point, it was clear that Bobby was the star. So they called themselves Bobby Fuller and his combo and headed out on a full tour of the Southwest.
After the tour, the band members returned to El Paso, but the Texas town felt smaller than when they left. They were ready to take the band to the next level, so Bobby and Randy headed to L.A.
In El Paso, Bobby and Randy were big-time musicians, but when they made it to L.A., they quickly realized that they were small fish again. They had to take a small job playing surf music at a hotel to pay their rent. But what they really wanted was a record deal. Once they got settled in California, Bobby wrote to his parents, asking them to ship him his demo tapes.
As soon as they came in the mail, Bobby and Randy headed out to drop the demos at every record label they could. But no one would even listen to the tapes, let alone give them a deal.
At least, not until they headed to Delphi.
Please, if you could just put the tape on Mr. Keen's desk.
I'm sorry, boys. It doesn't work that way.
What if President Lincoln asked politely?
It's time to go, boys.
Karen, I'm out for a bite. Hold my calls.
Yes, sir, Mr. Keen.
Wait, excuse me, are you Bob Keen? The Bob Keen?
What's it to you?
I'm Bobby Fuller, and I've come from El Paso with a new sound that's the best thing you've heard since Buddy Holly. Maybe if you need some lunch company?
Only if you're buying.
Bobby convinced Keen to listen to their demos, and he was impressed. But Keen told him he didn't have a hit, and if he wanted a record deal, he needed one.
Come back in a year. Once you've figured out your sound, then we'll talk.
Thanks, Mr. Keen. We'll be back.
Bobby and Randy returned to El Paso to keep working on their sound. But the trip out west had changed Bobby. He decided that he really wanted to record his own music, with or without a label, and he wanted to do it right there in El Paso.
Bobby knew that playing shows was a big part of that, but he was tired of aimlessly bouncing from one small venue to another. If he was going to make a mark in El Paso, he had to start thinking bigger.
And so, on November 22nd, 1963, Bobby opened up his own teen club called the Rendezvous. His band, now called the Fanatics, would play 4 nights a week. The venue became the most popular teenage venue in the Southwest, practically overnight.
Unfortunately, keeping a venue up and running turned out to be a little more expensive than Bobby first thought. He began to nickel and dime the rest of his band, cut corners, and made it a habit to pay rent late. Eventually, he stopped paying rent at all, and on July 18, 1964, only 8 months after opening its doors, the Rendezvous was forced to close down.
Without a venue, Bobby turned his focus back to recording. In the summer of 1964, Randy had an idea. They should do a cover of the song I Fought the Law, originally written by Sonny Curtis. Bobby loved the idea. Curtis was one of Buddy Holly's friends and bandmates, after all. So he called in Jim and Dalton to back them up.
The recording turned out better than anyone could have hoped. Excited, Bobby decided to start his own record label. He called it Exeter 127.
Unfortunately, the label quickly went the same way as his teen club. Bobby ran out of money, and he was forced to go back on tour to support himself and his bandmates. And at one of their first stops in Carlsbad, New Mexico, their luck turned from bad to worse.
And so I told her, honey, I'm playing all night. Don't stop dancing on my accord. Does anyone have a light?
Hey, who left the van's doors open?
What are you talking about? Oh no.
Oh my god, our gear! It's all gone!
All of the equipment Bobby had spent so long accumulating, amps, guitars, reverb units, had been stolen.
Bobby Fuller was broke. His club was dead, his record label had failed, and now he had lost all his musical gear in one terrible afternoon. The band was out of options.
But suddenly, his mind went back to Bob Keane at Delphi Records. Maybe the band had come far enough in the past year to finally earn them a record deal. Bobby hoped so. It was now or never. So the band left El Paso and headed back out west.
Coming up, Bobby Fuller's dreams finally come true, until the day they turn into a nightmare. Now, back to the story.
22-year-old musician Bobby Fuller had become a local legend in Texas and earned the title the Rock and Roll King of the Southwest. But a string of bad luck forced him and his bandmates to make a big decision. In early 1965, they headed west to try to make it big in LA one more time.
Unfortunately, the Delphi records that had promised them a record deal in 1963 had changed dramatically in the past 2 years. The LA music scene was completely different. Surf music was out, the British invasion was in, and Bob Keane's label was struggling to keep up. Delphi was on the verge of going under.
But Keane's misfortune was Bobby Fuller's opportunity. Desperate, Keane signed Bobby Fuller and his band, but it quickly became apparent that LA had a much different way of doing things.
Bob Keane was a master of promotion and buzz. He tried everything to get Bobby Fuller to make a mark in the crowded music scene. But Jim Reese and the rest of the band felt like Keane's sales gimmicks just distracted from the music.
Fellas, have I got an opportunity for you?
Not now, we're in the middle of recording.
Trust me, you're going to want to hear this.
What is it, Mr. Keane?
Have you boys ever heard of the show Shindig? It's a new rock and roll television show that I think you'd be perfect for.
Have you ever heard of playing music?
Cool it, Jim. Did you book us a spot on the show?
Well, not yet, but I think we've got a shot. All we have to do is change the band's name to the Shindigs. If you're named after the show, they'll practically have to hire you. Don't you see?
I told you, Bobby. He's got nothing.
I thought you boys said you'd do anything to make it. Well, this is anything.
Bobby didn't like the gimmicks any more than the rest of the band. Yet, he knew they needed to make changes if they were going to make it big. As such, Bobby agreed to rename the band.
But Keane's plan didn't even work. The band never got a spot on the TV show. With that, Bobby decided to give up on the gimmicks once and for all. The band would be called the Bobby Fuller Four from then on.
Later that same year, the Bobby Fuller Four started to gain momentum around LA. Their first two singles, Take My Word and She's My Girl, started appearing on California radio, and their next song, Let Her Dance, became a bona fide hit in July of 1965.
Unfortunately, Bobby never saw a dime from its success. The record label had already sold the rights to Let Her Dance in an effort to make a little fast cash. But when the song blew up, the label realized its mistake.
Fortunately, Bobby had something even better in store. In the summer of 1965, the Bobby Fuller 4 released I Fought the Law, the old cover that Randy suggested all the way back in El Paso. And suddenly, Bobby's life changed forever.
The song quickly became the most requested song at their shows. Then it started appearing on local LA radio stations. Within a month, I Fought the Law was number 9 on the Billboard Top 100.
Suddenly, the Bobby Fuller 4 were a red-hot band. They performed at sold-out venues and began appearing on nationwide TV shows, even without changing their name. Even George Harrison of the Beatles said that Bobby Fuller was one of his favorite bands. When they headed out on tour again, the crowds were bigger than they could have possibly imagined.
It was everything that Bobby had dreamed of. But something about it still didn't feel quite right. Halfway through the tour, the band took a break in Los Angeles to record a new song. Bob Keane wanted to release a record as quickly as possible so it could coincide with the second half of the tour. Bobby wasn't so sure about Keane's song choice, though.
The single, The Magic Touch, wasn't in Bobby's Southwestern style. It was a Motown-inspired single that leaned heavily on overdubs that the band couldn't replicate live. Bobby reluctantly recorded it, but once he heard the song, he asked Keane not to release it.
But Keane released it anyway. In early 1966, The Magic Touch premiered without Bobby's permission. The Bobby Fuller 4 were furious. Finally, they decided they'd had enough. The band decided that, fame or no, this tour would be their last. They were going to break up when they made it back to LA.
The band didn't know that their label had gone through some major changes while they were on the road. The record label had merged with another company to form a new company called Privilege Distribution. Suddenly, Privilege owned the worldwide rights to the Bobby Fuller 4.
In April of 1966, Privilege hired a man named Ron Roessler to be the general manager of the company. At the time, Roessler was already working at a label called Roulette Records, which was owned by a notorious executive named Morris Levy. Levy was well known around the music world as a shark and a cutthroat businessman. And now, thanks to his connections with Privilege, he owned the Bobby Fuller 4.
Awfully nice club you've got here, Mr. Levy.
Oh, Bobby, you don't know the half of it. But I called you here to talk business. So, let's talk.
Not to be rude, but I don't think we have any business to talk about.
That's where you're wrong. You're signed with me now.
I appreciate the offer, but we already have a record deal, and...
You've got it all wrong. I'm not asking. I'm telling. I already acquired the rights to your music. This is just a courtesy call. But I think this could be a very mutually beneficial relationship. If you let it.
How's that? That's a lot of money. But Mr. Levy, sir, the band, we've decided to break up.
Break up? I'll tell you when you break up.
News of their breakup did not go over well when the band returned to LA. Bobby Fuller was still under contract after all, but Bobby wanted out. He wanted the creative freedom that he used to have in El Paso. He decided to move his mother out to California to live with him. Maybe together they could figure out a path forward for his career.
But there would be no path forward. On the evening of July 17th, 1966, Lorraine Fuller said goodbye to Bobby as he headed out for the night. It would be the last time she'd see him alive.
Bobby, is that you?
Go back to bed, Mom.
Oh, where are you going?
Don't worry about it. You shouldn't be up.
Oh, but it's so late.
I'll be right back. Don't wait up.
Bobby drove off in his car and Lorraine went back to sleep. When she awoke the next morning, her son was still gone. Lorraine immediately started to worry. She had already gone through this with Jack once before.
That afternoon, Lorraine got a call from Bobby's label. They told her that Bobby had missed an important meeting. Something was wrong.
Lorraine began calling the police over and over, but they were no help. They told her to calm down and wait. Her son would likely be home soon.
Late in the evening of July 18th, 1966, Lorraine's wait came to an abrupt end. She noticed that Bobby's car was back in the driveway, and so it seemed was he. But when she went out to talk to him, she came face to face with her worst fear.
Bobby was dead. His lifeless body sat up in the driver's seat, bloodied, bruised, and doused in gasoline. It seemed Bobby Fuller had fought someone, and whoever it was, they had won. July 18th, 1966 was supposed to be a celebration for the Bobby Fuller Four. The band was soaring in popularity thanks to their hit song, I Fought the Law, and they had just finished a massively successful tour of the East Coast. From the outside, they were rock stars living the dream.
But inside the band, everything was falling apart. The Bobby Fuller Four had decided that it was time to go their separate ways, and it was time to tell Bob Keane the news.
If Keane knew what the band was thinking when they showed up that day, he didn't let on. He just invited 3 of the Bobby Fuller Four into his office to sit and wait for Bobby.
A few minutes turned into half an hour, but still no Bobby. The band started getting impatient. Eventually, that impatience turned to worry. It wasn't like Bobby to miss a meeting, especially one as important as this.
Bobby Fuller never made it to that meeting. Soon, Bob Keane and the rest of the Bobby Fuller Four discovered that this summer day in 1966 wasn't just the end of their band.
It was the end of Bobby Fuller's life. This is our final episode on Bobby Fuller. Last week, we covered Bobby's life and the events leading up to his demise. This week, we'll cover the mysterious circumstances around his death and who might have been responsible.
We have all that and more coming up. Stay with us.
In 1966, 23-year-old Bobby Fuller was living his dream. His band, the Bobby Fuller Four, had successfully escaped the Southwest and found rock stardom in Los Angeles. And with songs like I Fought the Law topping the charts and an upcoming international tour on the books, it seemed like Bobby had nowhere to go but up.
But by the time summer came around, trouble was brewing for the Bobby Fuller Four. Contract disputes with their label, Mustang Records, had started to tear the band apart. The label seemed to care more about Bobby than his bandmates, Jim, Dalton, and Bobby's younger brother, Randy.
When the band finished their East Coast tour and returned to Los Angeles in July of 1966, the tensions came to a boil. The Bobby Fuller Four had decided to break up, even if that meant Bobby had to break his contract with Mustang Records.
On July 18, 1966, the Bobby Fuller Four scheduled a meeting with Mustang label head Bob Keane to tell him the bad news. But Bobby never showed up.
So, what? He's not coming?
He'll be here. He promised.
Look, why don't we just reschedule? I don't think there's anything too pressing to talk about. Your tour went great. We'll have you boys out to Europe in no time.
I guess Bobby doesn't even feel like he needs to show up. He used to have our backs, you know. We used to be a team.
Cool it with that, Jim. You boys are bandmates. You're business partners.
That's just the thing we're here to tell you. We're not anymore. The Bobby Fuller Four has officially broken up. That's what Bobby would tell you if he cared enough to show up. I guess we'll see you later.
Are you kidding me? I don't care what happened on that tour bus. I have a contract right here that says you're a band as long as I say you are.
But no matter what was going on within the band, it wasn't like Bobby to just blow off a meeting. so Randy Fuller called their mother, Lorraine, to see if she knew what happened to Bobby.
No, Randy, I don't know where he went. Last night he left in a rush. He said he'd be right back, but he's still gone. I've been checking the parking lot for his car every half hour. Please tell me when you find him. It's like Jack all over again. I can't go through this anymore.
Later that day, on one of her trips down to the parking lot, Lorraine Fuller was excited to see that Bobby's car had finally returned. But as she approached the figure sitting in the front seat, her relief turned to dread.
Her son was dead. His body was propped up in the front seat. He was covered in bruises and scrapes like he'd been beaten, and there was a tube clenched in his hands. Lorraine traced the tube with her eyes to the passenger seat, where it disappeared into a can of gasoline. She bolted inside to call the police.
When authorities arrived and opened the car door, the smell of gas was almost overwhelming. Behind them, Lorraine Fuller wailed uncontrollably until a cop had to escort her inside to let them conduct an investigation.
Another dead rock star. Looking like suicide.
Suicide by gasoline. Pretty strange way to go, don't you think?
You know these types. Have to be unique or something.
I suppose, but what, he drove himself here and then huffed gas until he died? Wouldn't he have gotten sick from the fumes first? And how do you explain the dirt on his slippers or the bruises and cuts all over his arms? Something smells funny, and it isn't gasoline. I think that...
Hey! Listen up. This one was suicide. All right? Open and shut.
The police investigation wasn't exactly extensive. They struggled to pull Bobby's body from the car. It had already become stiff and inflexible. They also refused to dust for prints at the scene, and they barely searched for potential witnesses to question.
They did, however, speak to Lorraine Fuller.
So, would you say your son was depressed?
Not quite. Bobby was always upbeat, the life of the party. I mean, sure, he felt down sometimes, just like all of us do.
Right. Sure. I get it. Maybe one day he gets a little too down, has one too many, decides the rockstar thing isn't all it's cracked up to be.
Wait, no, that's not what I'm saying.
You didn't have to, ma'am.
The police were quick to rule Bobby's death a suicide. His cause of death was gasoline inhalation. Since they claimed they found no evidence of murder, there was no investigation. Within a few days, the Bobby Fuller case was closed.
But the idea that Bobby committed suicide didn't sit right with those who knew him. He had even made plans with Randy to open a nightclub in El Paso, Texas, just a few days before his death, and the evidence didn't seem to add up either.
If the police's story was true, then Bobby drove himself home, parked, and then immediately started inhaling gasoline fumes until he died. But when the police found him, his body was already starting to stiffen. Rigor mortis normally sets in 2 to 6 hours after death.
Additionally, Lorraine Fuller had checked the parking lot at least once an hour that day, nervously waiting for her son to come back. There's no way she would have missed him for over 2 hours.
And then there were the cuts and the bruises, and his dirty clothes. Bobby's slippers were covered in dirt like he had been dragged. It may not have been hard evidence of murder, but it certainly seemed suspicious.
Well, that wasn't the only strange thing that happened that night either. Only hours after the police discovered Bobby's body, 2 of his bandmates, Jim Reese and Dalton Powell, reportedly had a strange run-in at their Los Angeles apartment.
Here's to Bobby. We gotta catch whoever did this, Dalton. Someone has to pay for this one. Who the hell is that? Wake up, Dalton. You invite anyone over? Shh. I see someone. They're coming up this way. And there's something underneath that guy's shirt. I think it's We gotta go! Get up! Out the back door, now!
If police had known about the mysterious gunman, they may not have been so quick to rule Bobby Fuller's death a suicide. Unfortunately, Jim Reese never told them about the incident.
It turned out that this wasn't the first time he'd had a run-in with the wrong people, some with gang ties, and he likely thought bringing in the cops would just make things worse.
Even if police had known, it may not have helped. The department was in shambles during the Bobby Fuller case. LAPD Chief William Parker had died from a heart attack just days earlier. Parker had led the force for nearly 40 years, and his sudden death was a shock that threw the entire LAPD into disarray.
The short and flawed investigation into Bobby Fuller's potential murder may have just been a result of bad timing, or maybe someone saw the loss of Chief Parker as an opportunity to bribe the right people and quickly get Bobby's death ruled a suicide in the midst of all the upheaval.
But if that was the case, Bobby's killer must have been rich and powerful enough to influence an entire police department. And it turned out that Bobby had made a few rich and powerful enemies in the months before his death. People with the means to get away with murder.
Coming up, we'll take a closer look at the suspects who may have played a role in Bobby's death.
23-year-old Bobby Fuller was still riding on the fame of his hit single, I Fought the Law, when he suddenly died in Los Angeles in July of 1966. While the LAPD quickly ruled his death a suicide, the strange, confusing evidence seemed to point to murder. At least, that's what Bobby's family thought, and so they decided to take up the investigation themselves.
In the days after Bobby's death, his father, Lawson, headed to Los Angeles. His wife, Lorraine, was already there. She had moved there to be closer to Bobby, but was now stuck dealing with the fallout from his death. Lorraine had already struggled to recover from the death of her first son, Jack. Losing Bobby was almost too much for her to bear.
As Lawson tried to console his wife, his brother Charles headed out to L.A. to be with their grieving family. Unfortunately, it turned out that Charles did more harm than good. Charles was somewhat of a loose cannon. Perhaps it was grief, rage, or a mix of the two, but while picking up his bags at the airport, Charles got into a fight with a fellow passenger.
When Lawson arrived to pick up Charles, he saw that his brother was in trouble and he jumped in to help. At some point, Charles pulled a knife on an airport worker. Before Lawson could even fully realize what was happening, both he and Charles were arrested.
Once they were at the police station, though, the tables turned. Charles wanted answers about Bobby's death, and Lawson did too.
Sir, please, hold still for the mugshot.
I'm not holding still until you answer my questions.
You're not the one in charge here, sir.
Who is in charge here, huh? Apparently no one, since Bobby Fuller got murdered, and nobody seems to care.
Will you tell your brother to calm down?
Calm down. He has a point. What kind of police station is this that you won't investigate cold-blooded murders, calling it a suicide and letting killers walk free?
You know what? Okay, look, I'll do you a favor. Just get out of here and we'll call it even, all right?
We're not leaving until we get answers. Why won't you investigate Bobby Fuller's murder?
If you know what's good for you, you'll keep your mouth shut.
Lawson couldn't stop thinking about his strange run-in with the police. It was clear to him that the LAPD knew something they weren't reporting and that they were actively trying to bury the murder case. Bobby's father decided he had to take matters into his own hands, so he hired a private detective.
The investigators started interviewing Bobby's close friends. First was the band's manager, Rick Stone, who had been with Bobby just hours before he disappeared.
According to Stone, Bobby was interested in trying LSD, which was still a relatively new drug in 1966. He had discussed the possibility of taking some with Stone and Randy that night. A few minutes later, Bobby got a call and left. Stone assumed it was from a drug dealer, but there was a more sinister possibility.
A few weeks earlier, Stone and Bobby had been driving when they were forced to pull over by two mysterious men. Bobby told Stone to stay in the car while he went to talk to them. When he got back into the car to drive away, he refused to say a word about what the men wanted. Bobby didn't speak for the rest of the drive.
It's possible that those two men were the same people who showed up at Jim and Dalton's apartment the night of Bobby's murder. But the private investigator never had the time to look into it. Just as he was starting to dig into the case, the detective found himself in a scary situation.
Can I bum a cigarette?
Oh, sure. Help yourself.
These things will kill you, you know.
That's what I've heard.
That's not the only thing.
Excuse me?
I heard you've been looking into things you shouldn't. That true?
Hey! What are you...
Some things can't be found out, you got me? Let this case die with Bobby Fuller.
Yes, I understand.
The private investigator abruptly dropped the case. Lawson Fuller was less than pleased. He had paid for answers, but all he'd found were more questions. Around that same time, Lawson learned from Randy that their manager, Bob Keane, had taken out life insurance policies on all the band members, and he might make a small fortune off of Bobby's death.
The timing seems suspicious. Keane had been struggling with money for a while. When he signed the Bobby Fuller 4, he even asked Bobby to bring personal equipment all the way from El Paso to the studio in LA because Keane couldn't afford his own.
The success of the Bobby Fuller 4 was helping get Keane back on his feet financially, but if he'd caught wind that the band was breaking up, maybe he decided to take matters into his own hands to keep the money coming in. And so, Lawson headed over to talk to Keane himself.
Ugh, it reeks in here.
I don't smell anything.
Are you drunk?
Depends what you mean by drunk. Listen, Lawson, glad to see you. I loaned Bobby a lot of money for equipment. Something like $12,000, if my math is right. With him gone, that debt falls on you.
You're out of your mind. That was Bobby's musical gear to begin with. He brought it all the way from El Paso. If anything, it's you who owes us money.
Well, now, Mr. Fuller, let's not get heated. We're only talking business here.
You're nothing but a leech, Keane. You won't be seeing a single penny from my family.
You'll be hearing from my lawyer.
Once Randy heard about his father's conversation with Keane, he decided to pay their old label head a visit. No one has ever said what happened during their get-together, but afterward, Keane never contacted the Fuller family again.
One thing was certain. Keane was desperate for money. He'd secretly fallen into drug addiction. By the time Bobby died, Keane was reportedly spending almost every penny he could find on speedballs, a sometimes deadly mixture of cocaine and heroin.
Earlier that year, Keane had even gone so far as to sell the rights to Bobby Fuller's music to a notorious New York producer named Morris Levy. Levy had a reputation around the music world for using his mob connections to get better deals on his artists. Levy even strong-armed his musicians into giving him writing credits on all the songs he produced.
This earned him twice the money from the record, and if any of his musicians complained about it, then they wouldn't be his musicians anymore. Levy had such a wide reach in the music industry that his nickname was the Octopus. And thanks to Keane, he had his tentacles around the Bobby Fuller 4 when Bobby died.
That should have made Levy a prime suspect in his murder, if the LAPD even bothered to investigate. Levy had access to some of the most powerful organized crime in the country, and he was set to make a lot of money off of the Bobby Fuller 4, at least until the band decided to break up.
It's possible that Levy had Bobby roughed up and followed around by his goons in order to try and convince him not to leave his contract. That would explain the two men who stopped Bobby's car to talk to him.
But Bobby would have been worth much more to Levy alive than dead. Perhaps Bobby's death was an accident, the result of a shakedown gone too far. In any case, Levy also likely had the power to lean on the LAPD and make sure they didn't look at Bobby's death too closely.
We'll never know exactly why the police refused to investigate the mystery of Bobby Fuller's death. But if there was anyone influencing their decision behind the scenes, the person responsible was likely Morris Levy.
Regardless of whether it was the result of coercion or simply poor police work, Bobby Fuller's case floundered. It took 2 months until authorities finally got around to performing an autopsy on his body in September of 1966. The coroners confirmed Bobby's cause of death as asphyxiation due to inhalation of gas fumes.
But the coroners didn't seem very confident with the circumstances. In the report, they checked both boxes for suicide and accidental.
And next to both check marks, they drew giant question marks.
Lawson Fuller pressured the police to officially rule Bobby's cause of death as accidental, but they wouldn't do so until 2015. The case remained virtually uninvestigated.
Lawson accepted defeat. He brought his family back to El Paso, and the Fullers tried to move on. For the most part, they did, until 1988, when a surprise witness to Bobby's last night suddenly came forward.
Coming up, we'll meet Melody Dawson, a woman who claimed to have some answers about Bobby's final few hours of life. And now, back to our story.
By the late 1980s, the death of mid-60s rock icon Bobby Fuller was a distant memory for most. Despite his family's numerous attempts to get the police to reopen his case over the years, there was no new information about the night of Bobby Fuller's death, at least until 1988, when a woman named Melody Dawson came forward with some long overdue evidence.
Up until 1988, it was widely accepted that Bobby's mother, Lorraine, was the last person to see him alive before he disappeared. But according to Melody, Bobby Fuller had spent the night at her place.
In the mid-1960s, Melody was a regular at PJ's, an LA venue where the Bobby Fuller Four frequently played. She met Bobby through Mustang Records investor Larry Nunez, and the pair hit it off immediately. Not everyone was reportedly a fan of Melody, though. Bobby's bandmates suspected that she worked for the record label and that their affair was just a way to keep tabs on Bobby.
That apparently didn't faze Bobby. He would regularly show up at Melody's, and they were together just hours before he died. At least until a mysterious phone call sent him running out her door.
This was all information that the police desperately needed to hear back in the summer of 1966, but it turned out that Melody had a good reason for waiting over 20 years to share her side of the story.
Okay, we're rolling. Can you tell me that again?
I said I was with Bobby the night he died.
And where exactly were you?
We were at my place, of course. He came over to my place quite a bit back then.
Back up a little bit. Let's start at the beginning.
Oh, sure. I called Bobby and told him to come over. He seemed upset, like there was something on his mind. I'm not sure what. Then at 1 a.m. he got a call. I'm not sure the person's name, but it was some woman. I asked if I should be jealous. He shook his head. Said it wasn't like that. Said it was a woman from New York and he had to go meet her.
What were they meeting about?
Honey, I never got the chance to ask. But as Bobby was leaving, he said it was something about his contract. I think he was about to quit.
This seems like something the police would have wanted to know back in 1966.
Look, Bobby's death was something he didn't talk about.
Melody didn't go into any more specifics, but it wasn't hard to draw a line from the mysterious female caller and the other New Yorker in Bobby Fuller's life, Morris Levy.
Melody Dawson also let a few other things slip in her interview. She said that Larry Nunez told her that Bobby had been dragged and placed in the car after he died.
When Randy Fuller heard all of this, he knew he needed to dig deeper into his brother's death. He'd never stopped searching for answers to Bobby's mysterious death, but after 20 years, he likely assumed the mystery would never be solved.
But thanks to Melody, everything had changed. Randy not only found her story interesting, but her timing seemed like a clue in itself, because right around the same time Melody came forward, Morris Levy was tied up in a murder investigation of his own.
In the early 1980s, Levy's longtime protege, Nathan Big Nat McCalla, was brutally murdered, and the FBI suspected that Levy was behind the hit. Over the next few years, the FBI investigated Levy and uncovered evidence of extortion and conspiracy. In 1988, he was convicted and sentenced to a decade in prison.
If Melody Dawson only felt safe coming forward after Morris Levy was safely behind bars, it seemed to implicate Levy even more in Bobby Fuller's murder.
But even with this new information, Randy Fuller still couldn't get the LAPD to bother with his brother's case.
The guy who wrote I Fought the Law? The Clash song?
They just covered it. No, it was back in the 60s. Bobby Fuller? His death was supposedly a suicide, but the pieces didn't quite add up. And now, this new witness seems to point towards murder and a cover-up.
Well, if we can get her on record, we can bring it to the chief and get the case reopened. This seems like it could—
Don't bother. Leave Bobby Fuller in the past where he belongs.
But Chief, this Fuller thing just doesn't add up. His death is on the books as accidental, but there's nothing accidental about sucking a tube of gasoline.
Your tone is teetering on insubordination, rookie. You're both on traffic duty for the next 2 weeks. Maybe it'll help you learn to listen.
Wait, hold on a minute.
Don't make me send you down to records.
Finally, in the 2000s, Randy Fuller decided to take the failed investigation into his own hands. In 2014, he wrote a book about his brother's supposed murder and spelled out his personal feelings about what actually happened that terrible night in 1966.
In the book, called I Fought the Law, The Life and Strange Death of Bobby Fuller, Randy lays out a compelling case that Morris Levy was responsible for Bobby's murder. But he doesn't believe that Levy meant to kill him. Bobby's death was likely the result of a mob shakedown gone wrong.
According to the theory, Bobby died accidentally after a brutal beating, presumably in an attempt to keep Bobby from breaking his record contract.
The fact that Levy and Keene took out a life insurance policy worth over $8,000 was also suspicious, though the policy clearly stipulated that it wouldn't pay out if the cause of death was poison, gas, or fumes.
Randy also details some other opinions about Bobby's death in the book. Rick Stone, the band's tour manager, reportedly believes that Bobby's death was a complete accident.
Stone is convinced that Bobby left that night to try LSD, and at some point during his acid trip, he fell and died. That would explain his strange cuts and bruises. According to this theory, the people he took acid with decided to stage his death to look like suicide to avoid charges.
But these are all still just guesses. If anyone out there knows the truth about Bobby Fuller's death, they are staying quiet even after all these years. But that doesn't mean they'll stay that way forever.
Randy's book reignited a conversation about Bobby's alleged murder, and visibility about the case is the highest it's been since the 1960s. It might just be enough to convince a key witness to finally come forward.
Yes. Hello?
Hey, Pops, it's me.
Well. What an old guy do to earn himself a special Sunday morning call.
I was reading this book the other day, and it got me thinking about you, actually. You were on the force back in 1966, right?
LA's finest. I was so young that I can't believe they even trusted me with a gun. You should have seen my mustache. Took up half my face.
Did you ever hear anything about the Fuller case?
The what?
He was this musician, Bobby Fuller. Died in a real strange way. This book says that there might have been some kind of conspiracy in the police department. Like, to cover up his murder.
I haven't heard that name in a long time.
Pops?
While the case has yet to be cracked, looking at all available evidence, I think it's possible Morris Levy had Bobby killed and then covered it up. Levy was a mobster who was later investigated and convicted for racketeering charges. And if Bobby was planning to back out of his contract, Levy wouldn't have been very happy.
I agree. Levy had the connections and money to make the police look the other way. And let's not forget that Levy and Keene had a life insurance policy on Bobby. If he was going to stop playing music, then he was probably worth more to Levy dead.
Regardless, Bobby Fuller's death is another tragic case of a talented musician gone too soon. It's impossible to say how he might have helped steer the course of 1960s music if he had survived.
For Bobby's friends and family, his death is still an open wound half a century later. And without answers or even a proper police investigation, it's only left to fester.